And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if I include this broken air filter in my recycling bin, would I be arrested? And with a lunar eclipse coming this weekend, would then be a good time to sneak into my neighbor's garage and take back my chainsaw? And now, the podcast host who wields his chainsaw like a manly guitar hero, Pete Dominic!
Yes, indeed! Thank you very much, Pete Co., as always, for kicking us off. And thank you for joining me. Kevin G. said after yesterday's show, he said, happy 600th episode. The journey has been amazing. You get better and better like a finely aged scotch. And I've grown tremendously through your conversations. The guests, the dialogue, the openness and transparency. This is by far the best content out there. So happy to be part of the stand-up community. Kevin, how nice are you? And how great is that? And how lucky are we to have you in our community, as well as almost 800 other folks. I can't thank you enough. Thank you to everybody who's reached out to say something about 600. I don't want to make that big of a deal of it on the show. We will celebrate. We will get together. We will hang out on Thursday night and toast our success, which we couldn't have had. I couldn't have had, however you want to call it, without your support. So thank you very much to all of you who have reached out here on episode 601, where I've got your all-time favorite, my all-time favorite, one of my best friends now, Dr. Aaron Carroll, joining me. Always a great conversation with Aaron. We talked about women's reproductive rights, COVID, and more. And for the first time, I have the co-authors of a new book about the future of cannabis economics, titled Can Legal Weed Win? The Blunt Realities of Cannabis Economics. Two PhDs in economics joining me from UC Davis wrote this book. Robin Goldstein and Daniel Sumner will be my guests, and I think you're going to love and learn a lot from that conversation. We actually had a lot of laughs as well. Dr. Carroll, Robin Goldstein, and Daniel Sumner coming up. But first, it's time for your news update. What happened yesterday? What happened in the last 24 hours? We'll go through the clips, a little soundbite show, and then hit the headlines, and then we'll get to my guests. So let's do it. Time for the last 24. Well, today is day 477 of the Biden administration. There are 182 days until the midterm elections. We are 6 days away from the Board of Education election here in my town. President Biden said that tackling inflation is his top domestic priority. A group of House and Senate Democrats are introducing legislation to tighten judicial ethics laws. An administrative law judge in Georgia ruled that Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Great, can stay on the ballot. A federal judge dismissed Trump's lawsuit seeking to reinstate his Twitter account, but Elon Musk nevertheless said he would reverse Trump's permanent ban if his deal to buy the social network goes through, lighting everybody's hair on fire. Well, most people's, if you had any left. And if you did, this will. Our planet now apparently has a 50-50 chance of temporarily exceeding the 1.5 degree Celsius of above pre-industrial global warming threshold by 2026. According to the Center for Disease Control, gun deaths reached the highest number ever recorded in the United States in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, as gun-related homicides surged by 35%. More than 45,000 Americans died of gun-related deaths in 2020. Over half the deaths were suicides, a figure that changed little between 2019 and 2020. And now let's get to some of the sound that I've got from yesterday. Of course, the fallout continues on the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the leaked draft decision from the Supreme Court. Lots of talk of that, as there should be. Here is Jen Psaki at the White House yesterday.
And get rid of, sunset, eliminate, whatever you want to call it, Medicare and Social Security. That's a MAGA position. And that includes the chairman of the Republican National Committee. That's a MAGA position. That is the chairman of the party. So that's what the president considers. But also, obviously, given 2/3 of the American people, according to a Fox News poll, believe that Roe v. Wade should be protected. If you're on the other side of that, you're supporting an ultra MAGA position in the president's view. So we don't need to name call individuals unless they have positions that are aligned with what he feels is the ultra MAGA wing of the party.
All right, now let's go to Texas, where the governor there, Governor Abbott, had this to lie about and continue to make bullshit up.
You need to know where Beto stands on abortion. He believes that a fully developed baby, just seconds away from delivery, can still be aborted and killed. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Because he was asked if he would support legislation that if a baby survived an abortion, a doctor could be required to provide care to that baby, and he was against that legislation. That is wrong. It is dangerous, and Texans will not tolerate killing our babies, period.
Oh, okay, because, other places will tolerate killing babies. Got it. Okay, well, someone posted as a response to that this clip back from the presidential campaign where now Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, was campaigning. He actually went on Fox News with Chris Wallace. And I think Wallace is out of line here by the interruption and even the posing of the question. But that was his old Fox News days, right? Anyway, Pete Buttigieg has the greatest answer for this kind of thing when it's said. And so I wanted to play this as a response to Governor Abbott.
I think the dialogue has got so caught up on where you draw the line that we've gotten away from the fundamental question of who gets to draw the line. And I trust women to draw the line when it's their own line.
So just to be clear, you're saying that you would be okay with a woman well into the third trimester deciding to abort her pregnancy.
Look, these hypotheticals are usually set up in order to provoke a strong emotional...
In fairness, it's not hypothetical. There's 6,000 women a year who get abortions in the third trimester.
That's right, representing less than 1% of cases.
I know, but 6,000 pregnancy.
Let's take ourselves in... So let's put ourselves in the shoes of a woman in that situation. If it's that late in your pregnancy, that means almost by definition, you've been expecting to carry it to term. We're talking about women who have perhaps chosen a name, women who have purchased a crib, families that then get the most devastating medical news of their lifetime, something about the health or the life of the mother that forces them to make an impossible, unthinkable choice. And the bottom line is, as horrible as that choice is, that woman, that family may seek spiritual guidance, they may seek medical guidance, but that decision's not going to be made any better, medically or morally, because the government is dictating how that decision should be made.
All right, so the next time you hear somebody make that kind of argument that Governor Abbott made, that Democrats want to kill babies in their third trimester, that any woman would want to do that, you can remind them of what you heard Pete Buttigieg just say right there, or any other number of folks who have argued it really effectively, especially women. Okay, so let me move on to a woman, the Secretary of the Treasury. The Treasury Secretary, this is Janet Yellen. She was testifying yesterday on the Senate. She was asked about abortion, and this is an interesting answer.
I believe that eliminating the right of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades. Roe v. Wade and access to reproductive health care, including abortion, helped lead to increased labor force participation. It enabled many women to finish school. That increased their earning potential. It allowed women to plan and balance their families and careers. And research also shows that it had a favorable impact on the well-being and earnings of children.
Well, the Senate is going to take up a vote on codifying women's reproductive rights, the right to an abortion, on today. It won't pass, and there's a lot of arguments being made on the Senate floor yesterday. Here is the reprehensible argument made by the dishonest pro-insurrectionist senator from Utah, Mike Lee.
With this bill, Democrats in the House and the Senate are attempting to take this issue away from the people, away from the states, and force their radical abortion agenda on the American people as a whole. Now, make no mistake, this is their vision for America, fully funded by the abortion industry. It also perpetuates the tragedy of abortion, one that's a scar on our country's history.
Oh, wow. Tough to take, but I like to give you as much perspective as I can. The abortion industry? Really? Come on. Industry? All right, here is the senator from Massachusetts with a response. This is Elizabeth Warren.
A far-right extremist Supreme Court wants to force their views on every American. Roe versus Wade has protected the right to a safe, legal abortion for nearly 50 years. Though Republicans have tried to challenge it in court many times, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed Roe over and over and over again until now. So what changed? Why is something that is repeatedly referred to as settled law on the threshold of being swept away like so much dust? Why is a law that is literally protects tens of millions of people, and they have depended on it to protect access to a safe, legal abortion, suddenly about to evaporate? We don't arrive here accidentally. We are here because Republican politicians have spent decades plotting for this moment.
All right, now here is the the governor of Nebraska. He's on his way out. He's been term limited. Pete Ricketts. He's on Newsmax yesterday, and he is getting ready for his next job, which is to be a commander in the Future America version of Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale. Gilead, here is his audition tape.
Roe versus Wade was a horrible decision nearly 50 years ago. It took away power from the states. This, again, according to the Constitution, and that's what we should be guided by. The powers not specifically outlined to the federal government should go back to the states. This is one where the states should be regulating this. And I look forward to this Roe versus Wade being overturned and for us having the opportunity here in Nebraska to do more to protect preborn babies.
All right. Yeah, that one will turn your stomach. And I think that's a pretty good audition tape. He's going to do well in Gilead. And now, last night, Alicia Menendez, who's an old friend of mine from her HuffPost Live days, was in for Chris Hayes, and she absolutely killed it. Worth watching that hour last night. She has the last word on this in today's mashup of sound dealing with the aftermath of this leaked draft decision. She was on last night with the senator from Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, talking about the vote that's going to happen today in the Senate.
Thank you for being with us. Talk me through the goal of tomorrow's vote.
Well, Elisa, it's wonderful to be with you. And tomorrow in the United States Senate, each one of us is going to have the opportunity and the responsibility to vote yes or no on whether or not we support a woman's freedom to make our own reproductive decisions. That's the vote. For the folks that say our freedom should be taken away, they're on the side of saying politicians should decide for each of us what should happen in our most intimate healthcare decisions, that there should be government regulation on women for these most personal decisions. So tomorrow, we'll know. Tomorrow there will be the vote, and then we will go forward and continue to shine a light on what is happening across this country all the way till November, when we have an opportunity to change it by electing a bigger majority in the Democratic Senate and keeping the U.S. House and electing great people across the country.
All right, well, I'll have more on the Senate vote, which is destined to fail on tomorrow's show. And that's all I've got for you on the issue of Roe v. Wade potentially being overturned, the issue of abortion and women's reproductive rights. But I do have a great conversation coming up with Dr. Aaron Carroll about it that I think you're really going to like. Okay, well, let's get on to a couple of other things, pieces of sound I've got for you from yesterday. This is Elon Musk, who is doing a segment for with the Financial Times, and he said if he in fact does take over Twitter, he will reinstate Donald Trump.
I do think that it was not correct to ban Donald Trump. I think that was a mistake. because it alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. He is now going to be on Truth Social. I guess the answer is that I would reverse the PERMA ban.
All right, for a little analysis on this, let's go back to MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes. Alicia Menendez sat in for him, did a great job, and she was interviewing Quinta Jericek of the Brookings Institute and of The Atlantic magazine, who wrote about Trump losing his Twitter and what that meant in a piece for The Atlantic. The ringmaster is gone, but the circus remains. And Alicia asked Quinta what she thought about his Twitter ban and what it actually meant in terms of real impact.
I think that's just not true. There's, it's a little hard to put data to such a sort of a fuzzy question, but there have been studies. Signal Labs, which looks into these kinds of things, has done, looking into the media mentions of Trump after his deplatforming, and you see a really sharp downturn. If you look at Trump's social media endeavors like Truth Social, which Elon Musk mentioned, that's not doing particularly well. It really seems to be floundering. Trump's blog, which he tried before that, which was sort of Twitter, but he was the only one using it. He shut that down after less than a month because it wasn't getting enough readership. So I think it's pretty clear that, removing him from Twitter definitely led to a decrease in his influence. Now, query to what extent we can, trace that to his loss of his Twitter account as opposed to his departure from the presidency, but the two certainly do seem to be linked.
All right, now let's move on to the final subject I wanted to cover, with sound at least. It's Russia's offensive into Ukraine, which yesterday Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines testified at the Senate Armed Services Committee that Russia's refocus on Donbass after failing to capture the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv was likely, quote, only a temporary shift, and assessed that Putin's strategic goals have probably not changed. Here is Avril Haines in her own words yesterday at the Senate Armed Services Committee.
The uncertain nature of the battle, which is developing into a war of attrition, combined with the reality that Putin faces a mismatch between his ambitions and Russia's current conventional military capabilities, likely means the next few months could see us moving along a more unpredictable and potentially escalatory trajectory.
All right, now let's head to Ukraine, where PBS's great foreign correspondent Nick Schifrin sat down with a member of the International Legion of Ukraine, which is a Ukraine-funded foreign army. This is Captain Jan Fedra.
Why or how are the Ukrainian forces around Kharkiv gaining such success right now?
Mostly the Russians, they're using right now mixed units. They're not organized, and that gives us more bigger opportunity to push them back. They don't calculate the fire, and our artillery, they can find the positions, calculate the fire, and just destroy their positions.
His men are a company in Ukraine's International Legion. They're all foreigners who write messages in their RPGs to the Russians they target and are paid and armed by the Ukrainian government.
All right, great reporting by PBS there in Ukraine. And finally, I wanted to share some comments from the president yesterday, some questions from reporters for the president. Yesterday, he gave a little a chat on the economy with a sign behind him that said lowering costs, tackling inflation. Here are just a little bit of his comments, and then I'll play some of the controversial questions he was asked yesterday.
You don't have to take my word for it. It's in writing. They've made their intentions perfectly clear. Senator Rick Scott, Wisconsin, a member of the Senate Republican leadership, laid it all out in a plan. It's the ultra MAGA agenda. Their plan is to raise taxes on 75 million American families, over 95% of whom make less than $100,000 a year total income. The average tax increase would be about $1,500 per family. They've got it backwards, in my view. I proposed a minimum tax for billionaires. In recent years, the average billionaire has paid about 8% in federal taxes. Congressional Republicans have proposed increasing taxes on teachers and firefighters. 55% of the largest corporations paid net zero in federal taxes in 2020 on $40 million profits. It just isn't right. That's why I proposed a minimum tax for corporations. Their plan would also raise taxes on 82% of small business owners making less than $50,000 a year, but it would do nothing to help to hold big corporations and companies accountable. Think about it. Republicans in Congress are so deeply committed to protecting big corporations and CEOs that they would rather see taxes on working American families and try to depress their wages to take on inflation. Never mind the fact that many of these companies are recording record profit margins, even as they raise prices records amount.
All right, there's just about 2 minutes. I think he talked for about 20 minutes before he took questions, including this question, which I think is a bad question from a reporter who said, you're a train guy. Why don't you just tell everybody to get on the train and take public transportation? I think President Biden handled the answer perfectly, actually.
Retail gasoline prices and diesel prices at record highs.
Yes.
Yet you have yet to ask Americans to consume less. You're a train guy. Have you ever thought of your administration asking Americans to drive less, to take public transport?
Well, if you ever raised a family like mine, you don't have to tell them. They're doing everything in their power to figure out how not to have to show up at the gas pump. That's why, for example, one of the things that's going to help a lot, but it's going to take time, is our infrastructure bill. The truth is, they don't have that many options in terms of transportation around the country right now. If you live in the Northeast Corridor, you do. If you're driving back and forth between Baltimore, Washington, New York, et cetera. But you don't have many choices. You don't have a whole lot of choices to deal with other aspects of transportation in terms of local transportation.
Later on, President Biden admitted he didn't expect the Republicans he knew to be taken over by the now ultra MAGA. That's the talking point they're using, label that the White House and other Democrats are using. The ultra MAGA party taking out the Republicans. He didn't expect that. I expected that. Wajid Ali expected that. Jared Yates Sexton, Andrea Chalupa, and Sarah Kendzior, and so many other people expected and predicted that. But the president, he just couldn't accept it. At least he admits the truth now, even if it's too late.
In a sense, I never expected. Let me say this carefully. I never expected the ultra MAGA Republicans who seem to control the Republican Party now to have been able to control the Republican Party. I never anticipated that happening.
All right, one more. This was a weird kind of moment or question. This is CBS's Ed O'Keefe asking President Biden to respond to Senator Rick Scott, who took some pretty strong shots at Joe Biden, saying he was unfit, he was incoherent, and worse. Here it is.
You called out Rick Scott a little while ago in your remarks. Earlier today, anticipating your remarks, he said, and I'm just quoting here, that the best thing, most effective thing Joe Biden can do to solve the inflation crisis he created is resign. He's the problem. The senator added later, Joe Biden is unwell, he's unfit for office, he's incoherent, incapacitated, and confused. These are his words. Offering him a chance to respond to that.
I think the man has a problem.
Can I ask you
All right, not a terrible response. I don't know. What would you have said? But I think the man has a problem, is what President Biden said. All right, well, that's all the sound bites I've got for you, but I do have a whole bunch more headlines. It's time for what we call the News Dump, and here's a brand new News Dump jingle by Pete Coe, based on a story about a wayward pig who is now missing from a Kaysville, Utah neighborhood.
Lost pig in Utah has the neighbors in a huff. We hope the police find it for today's News Dump.
Wow, a lost pig roaming along the streets over the weekend. Poor thing. I was driving around my neighborhood a couple days ago and saw that some neighbors of mine, had a pig in their front yard, and it shocked the shit out of me. I'd never seen that. I didn't even know it was legal, but it made me laugh pretty hard. Good for them. Pigs are smart. I guess they make pretty good pets. Okay, so I've got some other news for you, and I mentioned this already at the very top, but there's a 50% chance the world's temperatures will soon reach 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, a milestone scientists warned we need to avoid to prevent the worst impacts of climate change, according to the World Meteorological Organization that said in an update published on Monday, there's a 50-50 chance that the annual average global temperature will temporarily top 1.5 degrees Celsius in growth for at least one of the next 5 years. So that's major news being reported yesterday as temperatures soar 20 degrees above normal and wildfires continue to burn in the Southwest. Fire danger now at a critical level after reaching extremes on Monday, and we've barely gotten into spring. So this is not looking good. Workers at a Target store have filed for a union vote, so the movement continues. This one is in Christiansburg, Virginia. And speaking of unions, how about this? The House voted to allow congressional staffers to unionize. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, also announced a minimum annual wage of $45,000. Again, the House of Representatives voted Tuesday to recognize House staff members' right to unionize after announcing this increase in their minimum pay. The vote was straight down party lines. 217 Democrats voting for the measure, 202 Republicans voting against it. The Congressional Workers Union launched in February and said that after a survey distributed by the Congressional Progressive Staff Association found that 91% of the 516 staff surveyed wanted more protections to give them more of a voice at work. So we'll see what happens with that. Mario Batali was found not guilty of indecent assault. The company Carvana cut 2,500 jobs. Executives are going to forgo pay there. The Italian Prime Minister, Drago, was in D.C. meeting with President Biden, and urged a Ukraine ceasefire during their visit. Stocks turned mixed on Wall Street after a major sell-off. California laid out a plan to drastically cut fossil fuel use. California air regulators said Tuesday the state should cut petroleum use by 91% by 2045 in order to achieve ambitious climate change goals. The roadmap by the California Air Resources Board set the state on a path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, meaning as much carbon is removed from the air than that is emitted. The state's timeline among the most ambitious in the nation. Hawaii has a similar goal, and some other states have a 2050 deadline. Yesterday, our friend Ty, sent me this story about the Delaware State lacrosse team being pulled over and having their bus searched. Well, a lot of people think the impetus was race because the Delaware State lacrosse team it was mostly black women. Delaware Governor John Carney, along with the state's congressional delegation on Tuesday, condemned Georgia's authorities' search of the Delaware State University women's lacrosse team bus. And this story is getting bigger by the day, for sure. More and more attention being paid to it. In a piece published in the school's The Hornet newspaper, Delaware State sophomore lacrosse player Sidney Anderson wrote about Liberty County Sheriff's Office deputies stopping the bus driver, who is black, for a traffic violation. And I think I'm going to try to reach out to her. This story is really heart-wrenching and devastating, but yet really very important, I think, to discuss. OAN, the right-wing conspiracy network, has had to legally acknowledge that there was no widespread voter fraud by Georgia election workers. This is actually a pretty massive story that this media outlet, I'm not going to call it a news outlet, One American News, was forced to run a segment this week acknowledging that there was no widespread voter fraud committed by a pair of 2020 election workers in Georgia following a settlement between the workers and the network reached last month. Google this woman, Ruby Freeman, who was a victim of this crime. Just absolutely horrible, the story about what happened to her there. The House approved a bill of $40 billion in aid for Ukraine. 57 Republicans voted against it. And I can now report to you, because the results are in, that in Nebraska, the winner of the very crowded Republican primary for governor is Jim Pillen, a hog farm owner and veterinarian. A lot of mentions of pigs today on today's news dump. And he won over a candidate endorsed by Donald Trump, dealing the former president his first loss of the midterm election season. Earlier, I played the outgoing Nebraska governor, Pete Ricketts, and Jim Pillen will now be the nominee and most certainly win in Nebraska, where it's a very red state. And he defeated 8 challengers, including, luckily, Charles Herbster, who was accused late in the campaign of groping several young women, which is usually a winning behavior or attribute for Republican politicians in campaigns. The results were a setback for Trump after a decisive win in last week's Ohio Republican Senate primary for his candidate, J.D. Vance. I think he's probably going to lose in Georgia as well, where Brian Kemp is probably going to win that primary. And David Perdue, who's supported by Trump, is going to lose big. At least that's what the polling is saying, but who knows? However, Trump's candidate did win in the West Virginia House primary, the second West Virginia's second U.S. House district, a key race after West Virginia lost a seat in the 2020 race. CNN projected that Trump-backed Rep. Alex Mooney will be the GOP nominee there. And how about this for a final story, and a good one? Researchers have overcome a major hurdle in reversing deafness, discovering the gene responsible for crucial cells. Scientists can now create new hearing cells that can overcome deafness caused by aging. Considered a major hurdle to reversing hear loss, the gene discovery allows production of inner and outer ear hair cells. So that's good news. I don't know what that exactly means, what I just read, but it certainly does sound like good news for those of us who start to lose our hearing as we get older. And that is your news dump. All right, folks. Well, that is all of yesterday's news. Nobody does it better than us here at Stand Up in the solar-powered shed in Rockland County, New York. Please tell your friends that this show is basically 3 podcasts, 3 shows in one. You get a news show every day. You get 2 interviews as well. And so tell your friends to support the show. Subscribe, listen. You can go to the YouTube channel, subscribe there. What else? StandUpWithPete.com right now if you haven't subscribed with a paid subscription yet for as little as $5, and you can hang out with us tomorrow on the Hangout and every Thursday at 8 Eastern, anytime on the Discord platform available to members. And you get new friends. It's really cool to see that our friend Tina Winsett was driving with her daughter through all over the country, basically, to see her dad last week. And she hooked up with Brady while she was in Arkansas on her way back to Texas and sent me a picture. Listeners constantly connecting and hooking up, actually even in real life now. So that's just so heartwarming and cool, and wanted to share that with everybody else. But now it's time to get to my first guest. Coming up, I've got these 2 economists who wrote a book about the legal weed business, which is fascinating. But right now, I've got the smartest guy in the world, according to, well, me. He is a health science researcher. He's the chief medical officer now. He's a bigwig at University of Indiana. Someday, mark my words, he's going to be the president of that school or some other one for sure. You've seen him on all the major TV networks, including the Colbert Report. He was on the Colbert Report. I wonder how he got back on that show back in the day. He's a contributor to the New York Times. He has his own blog. He has his own award-winning YouTube channel with almost 500,000 subscribers now. YouTube.com/healthcare triage. He's written several books, and he is on Twitter at Aaron E. Carroll, the great doctor, the medical myth debunker, everybody's favorite scientist. Dr. Aaron Carroll joins me right now. Well, he is here. I've just told you all about him, but you know all about him. The great Dr. Aaron Carroll. I know you wanted to start by congratulating me on episode 600, so let's do that.
Woo! 600 is unbelievable.
Thanks, man.
Man. That's a lot. That's a lot. I remember when you started this and it was like, I don't know. So that's great.
Well, I couldn't. You were on show number 1, and I would have you on every single show if you had the time. So always psyched to talk to you. We always get a lot of we break my own records every time you're on. People love to hear you, and they should be also watching you, of course, on your YouTube channel, because you've just launched a campaign to coincide with Mental Health Awareness Month. Maybe you didn't know it, but that's May, and you guys are doing a series on mental health on YouTube Triage. Is that right? Healthcare Triage on YouTube.
We're specifically doing a whole month of episodes on different therapies for depression, and what the evidence says about all of them. Some of them are new, some of them are old, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, this first one you did CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which you go watch the video. But what is that? Can you explain? What is that type of? It's talk therapy. You go and sit down with a person, and it's something.
Yeah, it's a little more focused. It's based on the idea that patterns of thinking, and often unhealthy thinking, are responsible for mental health problems, including depression, and that by training yourself to not think in that unhealthy way, you can improve the symptoms and the reality of your depression. And there's a fair amount of evidence that it works. Now, it doesn't work for everybody, and it's not 100%, but it works, and it often works as well as, or especially in conjunction with medication. It can make a real difference.
Is that the kind that we do? Do I do that? Did you do that, CBT?
So I don't know that I've done CBT, because mine is much more, I spend the vast majority of time talking and not a lot of time in exercises, but I know people who've used CBT for anxiety, for depression, for insomnia. In fact, I think Austin even did a whole, either an article in the New York Times Upshot column or a series on the blog on, I think, its use in insomnia. But it's a little more prescriptive. It's like interactive and focuses on exercises and learning to think in more healthy ways.
Could I book, and could you give me permission to talk about you with your therapist for the show?
Ooh, I don't know about that. That would seem very strange. I suppose. No, you know what? I'm going to go with no.
Come on.
That's not a good idea.
Come
on.
on.
He would never feel comfortable. He would never feel comfortable.
I'm joking. But the ratings.
I do say all the time that he must leave and be like, oh my God, this would make such a good buck.
Well, I'm partially glad to hear you say that. Lots that I wanted to talk with you about today. And I want to start with first COVID. I read yesterday New York is in its fifth wave. There is a new variant. You've written about this and talked about this at nauseum, obviously. Where do how do we even talk about it right now in terms of where we're at as a country, or should we just always look at as this virus continues to spread throughout the world?
I mean, well, it's both, but I mean, part of it is looking at what's going on in your area, because of course things are still very different. The Northeast is experiencing a wave right now that the rest of the country may or may not. We just don't know. It's likely, just given the fact that usually these things eventually spread, but the order in which they spread and which parts of the country start first are always very different. What is a little bit different right now is that hospitalizations are lagging, I believe, a little more than usual, which is good, meaning that we're not seeing necessarily as much morbidity and mortality, in other words, seriousness of disease, at the levels in which we saw in sort of the January and December Omicron surge. We hope that that's what will continue to happen, but it's hard to tell. And, feels like much of the country is acting as if the pandemic is over right now, when it clearly is not. And it's certainly not over in much of the world, which has not yet been vaccinated or achieved even the levels of immunity that we might have here.
Do you see us ever going back, at least with COVID, to the kind of disruption of our lives that we had witnessed in the past, either because of politics or health, medical science?
I think it's unlikely for a variety of reasons. One, I think vaccines do make a difference in that significant numbers of people are much more protected than they used to be. In addition, we know a bit more about how this spreads and what's going on than we used to, and sort of where the highest risk areas are, and we could theoretically work to protect those. We also have treatments which are easier to get and work better than before that will prevent a fair number of bad outcomes if used correctly. All of that means that theoretically we should be able to blunt the really bad negative effects of this for those who are at highest risk. Now, of course, the devil's in the details. It takes having those things is necessary but not sufficient. We need to make it so that access to them is equitable, fast, and cheap, if not free. We're nowhere near that. And so we're not in an ideal situation yet, but I do think that enough is in place that there would not be the will to go into lockdown.
Right.
Yeah. Nor is there likely ever going to be the massive levels of disease and death that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, especially amongst those at highest risk. We have vaccinated a fairly decent percentage of elderly people. We have gotten a fair number of people with chronic conditions vaccinated. That should hopefully blunt the worst effects of this. And if we can turn this eventually into an illness that results in relatively few people getting truly sick and dying, then it approximates other respiratory viral illnesses, and we don't usually shut down for those.
All right. Interesting. And I think hopeful. I wanted to I want to talk with you, if we can, about sex.
Yeah. Okay.
You have written and spoken and talked about and YouTube healthcare triaged about it for your whole career. You're a pediatrician, of course, and you've also given me great advice, you and your wife, on parenting. When it comes to sex, the advice has generally been from you guys, answer whatever questions your kids have. Don't always answer their questions unless they're asking you about your own sex life with their mom or dad. Maybe that's, somewhere there. But if they're comfortable with that, answer that too. So that's always been great advice for parents. Talk about it, answer their questions. But the more controversial issue nowadays, and it's come back, as I'm sure you know, is sex education in school. And this can obviously lead into the conversation about abortion. But what is the appropriateness and what are the statistics? Where does the research say about teaching sex ed at certain age levels? What does it mean for pregnancy, STDs, et cetera?
I mean, comprehensive sex education has been shown over and over and over again to lead to, fewer pregnancies and lower levels of sexually transmitted diseases and safer sex in general. Teaching abstinence only does not. And it has been shown to be inferior to comprehensive sex education and over and over again. Politics and people's personal preferences get in the way of that. But I think evidence is pretty clear that again, comprehensive sex education works.
And if it's not there, the opposite can happen. More unwanted pregnancies, right?
Burying our head in the sand doesn't work. Not talking about sex doesn't get rid of sex. It gets rid of safer sex, but it does not get rid of sex. And so failing to engage in this or not educating about it is a choice. That's the thing. I think people often pretend like, well, if we just don't do it, then that's not a decision. Everybody can make their own decision. Well, not doing anything about it is a choice. Not doing anything about it leads to worse outcomes than doing something about it, like comprehensive sex education.
When you hear about the bills like the one from Florida, the Don't Say Gay bill and so on, a lot of times people have this conversation about age-appropriate conversation. I think that's fair and good, right? But when people say we shouldn't talk about sexual orientation to a kindergartner, I say, well, we should talk about the fact that men do love and marry men and women do love and marry women. And that has to be, we can talk about that. We don't have to talk about the specifics, but you see that if your friend, if your teacher is gay, you can't deny that. So what about the age appropriateness of the conversation, or what about bills like that one?
Well, those are two separate things. See, what's interesting about that, what I find interesting about that is that's not about sex. I mean, nobody is talking about comprehensive sex education in kindergarten. At least I don't think many.
Well, they're saying that we are talking about that.
When we talk about it in kindergarten, more often than not, we're talking about is like marriage or, being dad and dad or mom and mom or, whatever choices of titles you choose for as a parent. But that is different than sex education. But somehow it's all gotten wrapped up into one. And so, not being able to talk about the fact that, some people have two moms, some people have two dads, some people have a different family structure. That's just denial again. I mean, it's going to happen. Some kids are going to have parents that are different than other kids' parents. I don't understand what we seek to gain by that. I think in some ways, the way we discuss this has been tied up with sex education, but those are very separate things.
Right, for sure. So when you hear these ideas, for example, I want your personal opinion on it of this book is not appropriate to teach because it depicts a rape or it talks about masturbation or any other sex, in at a certain age level. Again, I mean, what do you think about those kinds of conversations or those kinds of, I think, restrictions or proposals that are being put on books like that?
Well, I mean, some things are not age appropriate for probably for certain children, and clearly some decisions have to be made there. Obviously, graphic descriptions of rape probably don't belong in kindergarten books, but that's different. And to sort of tie that up and somehow say that is equivalent to recognizing that some kids have different parents than others are very different things. Right. And it's unfortunate that it's all got tied up or that the equivalence is made. I would feel very comfortable saying, yeah, I don't think graphic descriptions of rape belong in a kindergarten curricula or even in the discussion in the room of what's going on. We don't need to talk about that in terms of news review in a kindergarten class, but that's very, very different than talking about how some people's families are different than others.
I want to talk to you about women's reproductive health care in terms of how far we've come since abortion, for example, was last illegal. There's all kinds of new technologies, treatments, and medications that we can use and take for both contraception and to terminate a pregnancy. How much has changed, whether it be from contraception to the Plan B pill, that do you think changes that dynamic for people that might now not have access to an abortion? Do you think that we're in a different situation because of the technology and treatments available now that weren't in the 70s?
No, because again, it's like just as we talked about with respect to COVID treatments, those kinds of things aren't equally and equitably accessible to all. There's been plenty of evidence showing that even though Plan B is supposed to be over the counter for almost anyone at this point, many people have a hard time getting it, and pharmacists sometimes intercede and block it. Not everyone has, the ability to recognize or know that they are, or to know about that this exists and that they can go get it. Not everyone has money to pay for it. Plan B is not free. So no, it's just not there yet. And none of these things are 100% guarantee. And so, no, I don't think, now this is the thing. It will be an interesting thought discussion to be what would people's views of abortion change if we made it so that contraception and other means were just so easily available to everyone but that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is where we make it difficult for many people to engage in family planning on the front end and then act to restrict abortion on the back end.
Yeah, you've always been a policy guy, and you've taught me to be that way as well. And that's obviously a great answer in terms of outcomes and accessibility and how some people have it and some people don't. And that leads me to another, horrible statistic about women. What is it? The statistic on mortality rates of birth. What is the statistic I'm talking about? Birth rates.
Say that one more time, sorry.
Mortality rates with American women in giving birth.
That's moms dying while impregnant or giving birth. Our maternal mortality rate is massively high, heading in the wrong direction. And there are huge disparities where mothers of underrepresented minorities, especially Black mothers, have a mortality rate significantly higher than everyone else. It's just horrific, heading in the wrong direction, and makes no sense given our wealth and our ability to make a difference there.
Maternal mortality rates was what I was looking for. What is the issue there? Why America and why Black women?
Well, we can talk about a variety of different things, but a huge amount of it is just massive disparities in the healthcare system and structural racism, where the healthcare provided to Black women is less good than that often provided to white women. It is, their ability to get prenatal care, to have, good nutrition, to have good care, better living situation. At every level, structural racism comes into play, and it's bad to begin with. Now, whether there is also something else on top of that, I don't know. I think that there's certainly, an interesting literature, but there's no question that a huge part of it has to be structural racism.
Why are maternal mortality rates so high? This means pregnant women die during their pregnancy or during the delivery.
Pregnancy or delivery. Yeah. And it's like, it's known. We've done lots of videos on this too. It's just known. And it's like, it's going in the wrong direction. And it's horrific. And what do you do other than go, that just sucks and this country is terrible, and not addressing it and making a difference?
Why do pregnant women die?
Well, a variety of reasons. They can die of, really high blood pressure and then seizures, which is eclampsia. They can die of infections. They can die of problems related to delivery. I'm not exactly sure what the most common causes are, but they die of all of these things and more, and they die at higher rates than nearly any other country we'd want to look at.
So what do you think? So what do you think then? I'm trying to get to this, real question is limiting access to abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade, limiting access to abortion. What does that mean for the health care of women, of pregnant women, of women who might not want to be pregnant or might want to be pregnant? I mean, how do you see this playing out?
Well, it won't play out well. I mean, first of all, okay, I mean, lots of people have written about this, many probably who know more than I do. But I think what's going to happen is there will be abortion. It will just be quiet and under the table, and it will be unequally distributed, and some of it will be less safe because it will not be part of the healthcare system. There was abortion before Roe v. Wade. There will be abortion after Roe v. Wade, and it will be, more of it will probably be medical and pills ordered online, and and it'll be inequitable, and that some states will have it and some states will not, and it'll disproportionately affect poorer people in states without abortion because people with means will find a way to get it done, safely and in states where it can occur. But on top of that, there's no question pregnancy carries a risk. I just talked about maternal mortality rates. Pregnancy is significantly more risky than abortion. And so forcing more people to go through full pregnancies not only will have, major life consequences, it'll increase his chances of morbidity and mortality, and especially when it is not desired. And anytime we drive people away from the healthcare system for whatever reason, we put them at higher risk for, bad outcomes. And so that's likely to occur. And so, yeah, there will be absolute horrific negative ramifications of this. And it's easy to say, well, that there sometimes feels like there's a sense of, well, that's somebody else's fault. They deserve it. And that's where it's really
I think there's a sense it's somebody else's problem, too. But so, I'd ask someone like you, who's a relatively affluent, certainly well-connected guy who has a teenage daughter and lives in Indiana. So I don't know where your state's headed, but Julia came over to me the other day. Is like, should I be getting my IUD now? I mean, even those of us that are relatively affluent and with a lot of resources, and whether you live in a blue state or red state, how should folks be thinking?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, there's no question in my mind, Indiana will probably move to restrict abortion. I mean, we're a red state. I know we could go to Illinois if we had. I mean, if I had to think through the ramifications, of course, it definitely isn't affecting me at the moment. But you can imagine many ways that it could. But yeah, we are absolutely a red state. I know people who will fight and who will absolutely try to make a difference in this, but there's going to be a fair number of states there are a fair number of states that have already passed laws that would restrict or remove all abortion if Roe v. Wade were to fall. So it's sort of unknown territory. I mean, we just haven't been in this world for like 50 years. So it's unfortunate. And it's especially unfortunate because we know what the world looked like before then. And we're just not this is not probably for health reasons a good direction for women.
I mean, do you think it was too far for me when when Julia said that to me about the IUD? I actually said, no, that's ridiculous. But you do have to wear this. And I gave her a chastity.
Why did you say no?
Well, I was trying to get to my joke, but
sorry. No, but it's like, you know what? If my daughter said, like, I want an IUD, we'd probably talk about her getting an IUD. If she said she wanted any kind of birth control, we would talk about doing it. IUDs.
I don't want to disclose anything else about anybody else in my family, but we certainly have had that talk, and that's been advice that you've given me. But no, I was, I have no problem with her getting that. I'm just not sure that she needs to necessarily worry about it yet, because she could still have access to an abortion in New York State. But I did have her.
Yeah, but wouldn't you rather prevent the pregnancy in general than have to do it's so much better to prevent the pregnancy.
Yes, no, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with her dating whatever. But it's the second time you stepped on my sexist joke.
I'm sorry, but I can't let the shit go by. It's like, I don't think the fact that we have IUDs means that that women don't need abortion.
Okay,
like
so
that's what I can't even get to that statement.
Well, I just wanted to ask you if there's any randomized controlled study on chastity belts.
I don't know. I won't say no because maybe there is.
Oh my God.
It's
what
possible.
Is a modern? I just looked up chastity belt. They don't Google image them. It's steel underwear with a padlock on it. Anyway, I just think it's a weird thing for especially young women to have to even think about in 2022. I guess it's a tough.
It is hard to imagine that this is, sort of where we are.
What do you do, given all your expertise, if you run up against someone who's like virulently anti-abortion and wants to talk about the science with you? But do you just run? Do you run?
I don't run, but I mean, it's like I know lots of people who are anti-abortion, who are
any of them Jewish?
Really, probably. Yeah, probably some.
It seems like seems like a Christian thing.
No, I mean, I think people. I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. I know people from all different religions who are on both sides of this. I know people who sort of straddle the middle, where they are, totally fine with first trimester abortion, but get more squirmy. The problem with, of course, even taking that kind of tack is that first of all, the vast majority of abortions are already first trimester, and almost all third trimester abortions are because of horrible things that have gone wrong with pregnancy, or where it's absolutely to save the life of the mother. There are just, the idea of an elective third trimester abortion just cause is somewhat apocryphal. The vast majority of those are tragedies.
Right.
And usually in people who want the baby. So it's, we just create these apocryphal stories to describe what abortion really is and how it is used in the United States. And unfortunately, most of these stories just are not true. It is the vast majority of the time, it's not what people have painted it as,
right,
in terms of why we need to get rid of it. So it is. Yeah, I really feel strongly it just should be left as a personal decision between, a woman and her healthcare provider and whoever else she chooses to discuss it with. It's just not up to me.
Finally today, I've been thinking about the books that you co-wrote with Rachel Freeman, 3 of them, debunking myths about your body and your health. And I've been thinking about how I could take them and literally do like an hour of comedy on each one, because they all have so much. And one I was just thinking about here at the end is that for years, so many people still think that if you go outside, you can, quote, catch a cold. But after all we've learned from COVID, it seems like such a bizarre thing to say. Don't stay out there. You could catch a cold. Now come in here with all of your family and friends inside.
Yeah, well, you think we'd learn, but it won't make any difference.
You don't think that one's going to change?
No. Everyone is still going to believe that. People never change their minds on that.
All right. Well, I look forward to working on that special with you. Thank you very much, as always, buddy, for taking all my questions. We all love whenever you answer them here on the show. Thank you.
Anytime.
All right. There he goes, Dr. Aaron Carroll. How about it? Say hello to him on Twitter, as always, at Aaron E. Carroll. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, Healthcare Triage, as well as support him with on Patreon. Get his books, The Bad Food Bible, most recently. Read him in the New York Times, and so on and so forth. The great Dr. Aaron Carroll. Always awesome to catch up with him. Please let him know that you love hearing him on the show. And now joining me for the first time, 2 guests who are the co-authors of a new book, Can Legal Weed Win? That's the title of the book. The Blunt Realities of Cannabis Economics. They are Drs. Robin Goldstein, Drs. Daniel Sumner. Dr. Goldstein is an economist and author of The Wine Trials, the controversial expose of wine snobbery that became the world's best-selling guide to cheap wine. He's the director of the Cannabis Economics Group in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at University of California, Davis. He's got a degree, his bachelor's from Harvard, his law degree from Yale, and a PhD in economics from the University of Bordeaux. So basically, my same background. And Dr. Daniel Sumner is a professor of agriculture and resource economics at the University of California, Davis as well. He grew up in California on a fruit farm, served on the President's Council of Economic Advisors, was Assistant Secretary of Economics at the U.S. Department of Agriculture before joining the UC Davis faculty. He has a degree from Cal Poly, a bachelor's, a PhD in economics at the University of Chicago. These guys wrote this book together. I'm very happy to have them on for the first time. Robin Goldstein, Daniel Sumner, can legal weed win is the question they attempt to answer in their great new book, which you should get. I also really enjoyed the both of them and their personalities and their senses of humor, which was really fun that we hit it off right away. These guys were both great, and we were really dancing here, especially here at the top when we kicked it off. I absolutely loved it. Here we go, right now. And here they are, doctors Robin Goldstein and Daniel Sumner. Join me now. Gentlemen, you both have PhDs, so I like to call people with PhDs doctors. Is that okay with you, Robin?
No.
And Dan, you don't like it either, I'm guessing?
No.
Well, that's
whatever you do, don't call me Dr. Dan.
Well, that would mean you'd have to, like, that sounds like a fake doctor
Exactly.
with a TV show. Oh, it's Dr. Dan. It's the Weed Show with Dr. Dan. No, we won't do that to you.
Okay, good.
You're serious.
We're in agreement then.
You are. This is how I want to position you both. This is what I think of you, not knowing either of you at all. You're serious scholars and analysts who do have great personality, sense of humor. Is that fair, Dan?
I'll take it.
Is that fair about Dan, Robin?
Dan's got a great sense of humor.
All right.
I won't speak about myself, but
well, gentlemen, let's just start kind of at the beginning. It has a lot of names. You refer to it as weed, and you say why, Robin? Why do you call it weed and not pod or cannabis or marijuana?
So marijuana was the word that was used for many years, and that was actually a word that came from Mexico. It was a Spanish word that was adopted by the U.S. government basically as a racial slur. So when weed was first illegalized in the 1930s, as you probably know, they were putting up signs, posters all over the country, propaganda saying weed weed's a killer, and there were pictures of Mexican men smoking weed, raping white women, stuff like this, and they named it marijuana to associate it with Mexicans and to play off people's horrible racial stereotypes, and so that's the reason we don't say marijuana. The word cannabis has been adopted by a lot of states in the legalization process. It sounds more medical, it sounds more technical, but cannabis actually covers a category that's much broader than what we call weed. It includes hemp, for example. Hemp cloth is made from the cannabis plant. We call it weed mostly because that's what people call it informally. We all know what we mean when we say weed. We mean a product that gets you high, that has psychoactive properties that you can smoke or consume.
All right, so that's a great explanation. Now, Dan, do you want to make like a few more noises with your computer before I get to my next question for you? Because I can't edit it out.
Okay, I'm ready for you.
All right, you are a serious dude. You were the Assistant Secretary of Economics at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You have a PhD in economics. How is the weed market different from pretty much every other thing that grows in the ground and is sold at mass scale?
The biggest difference is it's more expensive. The rest of it is similar. It's supply and demand. In California, outdoor weed at the farm level is down to a couple $100 a pound or so. Supply and demand. Oversupply, prices collapse. I cut my teeth doing tobacco economics when I was a professor in North Carolina.
Right.
I've done a lot of wine economics, as well as corn and soybeans. And weed has characteristics of all of those. Even the illegal market. I wrote a paper about smuggling cigarettes, for example. So weed has lots of characteristics that are similar to all of these things. But one difference is it's really valuable product per pound. A pound of weed is worth what a ton of something else is worth.
Right. So, but let me just differentiate between the cost at purchase versus the cost of production. You're not saying, if I understand you right, that weed costs more to grow, to manufacture, and in legal weed to market and so on, than tomatoes or strawberries. You're saying we pay more for it at the point of sale, or am I misunderstanding you?
It's really both. And I think it's really important for people to realize growing weed at the farm, it's also expensive, mostly because of labor. So, and remember, you take these flowers, how many flowers on a plant, how many flowers can you grow on an acre? But then you dry them and you trim them. And so the product that you're actually selling, you don't get very much stuff in that dried form that people want. And it really is expensive per acre. The best Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa, incredible wine, $10 a pound. Weed, hundreds, thousands a pound.
So the big question, I think, that anybody that knows even a little bit about weed, the markets, and you answer this a lot in different ways, Robin, is can legal weed prices ever become more sufficiently competitive with illegal weed prices? I think the first question, though, is why are they not competitive?
There's a few reasons why they're not competitive. I'd say the biggest one of all is that you have a lot of taxes and regulations disproportionate compared with other agricultural industries. But another reason that's maybe just as important is that the businesses that are in this market right now are coming from a history of the people who've been growing weed for the last 100 years are coming from a history of doing things illegally. They're not used to running legal businesses. And so there's a lot of barriers to get into any legal business from an illegal one. And in states where you have medical history of medical marijuana, often that was unregulated. I just said medical marijuana. That was a major crime, medical weed. But you have everything from getting local permits to filing your taxes on time to knowing what consultants and lawyers and accountants to work with. That's just harder for folks getting into this business than people who've been running agribusiness for many years on a larger scale. So time, one of the things you see across the country in different states that have legalized is the cost and therefore the price comes down over time. The cheapest weed in America right now is in Colorado and Washington, and those were the first two states to legalize recreational. So it takes time to get for companies to get up to scale, and also for regulations to adjust to problems that they run into initially.
What about the cost, gentlemen, of promotion and marketing? Like, obviously, every weed company, if you can, I guess one of the best things you can do now is hook up with a celebrity, from Tommy Chung to who's another one that is attached their name to a marijuana, a weed brand. Forgive me, huh?
Yeah, Snoop Dogg.
Yeah. So, like, is my friend Mike, who sells weed on the side, he doesn't do any advertising or marketing. His whole business is word of mouth. So how much of a cost is that for the legal weed businesses market?
So what they have to do, of course, is if you're going to pay $10 million to a celebrity and you can sell $10 million worth of weed, you're not going to make it. You just spent $10 million to advertise it. But you better, in other words, if you could sell $1 billion worth of weed, then easy. So you really have to scale. I mean, one of the things about paying a lump sum amount to a celebrity is you better be big scale. Mike doesn't have to do that.
And I was going to add, in California, we have a lot of small producers who are trying to compete with those big celebrity type guys, and it's really hard for them to spend the kind of money that you would possibly need to do that.
I think Seth Rogen must be one of the biggest names in terms of celebrities.
Well, if you count out how much weed he's smoked in his movies put together, then that's a good sign.
It's a lot. It's a good point. And I know that he's getting out ahead or not. I think we are, from the movies at least. You have a ton of stats and charts in your book. So layouts, I want to get to some of the interesting ones. For example, I think the California market, the statistics, and I'm not sure exactly how, there probably is an issue with tracking illegal sales of anything. How do you know? But I think the statistic was in the California weed market, 3/4 is still black market, under the table, illegal, and 1/4 is at a store, tax, marketed, grown, and regulated. So that's an interesting and important stat. Unpack that one and share with me anything else you want to about the illegal and legal markets. Either one of you. I'm not sure who to ask these questions to. You guys know which is better, and we can alternate.
Yeah, so the legal market in California is still developing, but the most important thing to recognize is the illegal market was there a very long time first. And so California growing weed illegally, a lot of that is still shipped around the country. And so probably the share of total cannabis grown in California is more illegal, even more than 3/4. Within the state, remember the proposition that you're facing the consumer with. Gee, you've been smoking weed in California. You know a guy who knows a guy. You've been reasonably happy with the product. Now the state comes in and says, oh, we've made it legal. Now you can leave your neighborhood, drive out to the mall, and go to a store and buy it from somebody you've never met and pay twice as much. Sound like a good deal? You say, I don't think so.
Right.
So, the first question is, why would anybody buy legal weed in California? And there are reasons, and so 1/4 of the weed gets sold that way. I think that's the biggest story there. In terms of how we figure out the data, I could go into the details there if you want to.
Anything you want to add, Robin, in terms of the difference in the two markets?
I would add that it's important to remember that there's no penalty for buying, possessing, or smoking illegal weed. So from the consumer standpoint, it's, it looks like weed, it tastes like weed, smells like weed, and it's impossible, so far as we can tell, for consumers to differentiate from smoking it, whether this was made by a licensed producer or not. So the products are basically similar. There are some products that you're seeing evolve on the legal market that you didn't have in the illegal market, like specialized types of tinctures or new types of edibles or vape, some kinds of vape pens. You're now even seeing a lot of illegal vape pens. So because consumers can't necessarily tell the difference and there's no penalty for them, again, that makes the calculation a pretty tough one for them to be convinced to buy legal weed.
My moral argument is that I want everybody to have to pay into the price of civilization for whatever they do. So if they're growing weed and they're using, resources that are community resources, then they should have to pay taxes. Nobody ever pays all their taxes, whatever, but I don't know. I want to pay someone who pays into the system morally. I don't know if you guys write about that in the book or want to even talk about that. But I just wanted to opinionate for a second there on my own.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Pete. And let me reinforce it. So part of that 1/4 are people that say, yeah, one, I can afford it and I'm willing to do it. And I want this industry being legal. And the way I can do that is buying legal. I agree 100%. From the producer point of view, you could say, gee, most of my customers aren't like Pete. And do I want to go through the process of waiting 3 years to get my license, basically have no way to make a living for 3 years in order to become legal? And a lot of growers said, no, thank you. A lot of wholesalers and retailers said, no, thank you. I've got a customer base. I'll stick with them.
A lot of buyers of weed some people are concerned about what's in it. How strong is it? How potent is it? Is it laced with anything? Certainly a lot of parents, my peers, because I have teenagers, I constantly hear from them saying that. And I'm always like, I don't think we have really many instances of that. I just think it's really potent for a lot of people, and we can talk about the impacts. But I think that how much of a concern is it for the consumer? How interested in it are they? And is it a myth that regulated legal weed is pretty well regulated in terms of what's in it, not unlike food and drugs, the FDA and the other regulatory agencies. Like, what's in it. And by the way, we're not just talking about flour. I mean, we're talking about candy and anything that you can consume. You can put weed in it. And my understanding is with the legal market, there's so much regulation. They have to know what's in it, the ingredients, and so on. Is that true? Is it all myths?
No, that's absolutely true. So, and it's labeled, and you can tell from the label that it's safety tested, tested for things like, and there's potency. You have, even in the old unregulated medical markets, you did have some people testing for potency, maybe not the majority, but how strong is it? That's like the number one basic question. But I think the bigger differentiators with legal weed in most of the states that have legalized recreational is they've imposed all these other testing standards, heavy metals, contaminants, moisture content, microbials, E. coli, stuff like that, as well as some other things that, consumers or voters might care about that don't necessarily translate directly to health problems, like pesticides. There's not a lot of evidence that pesticides in weed necessarily cause health hazards. The jury is kind of still out. There's just not much research on it. But people may care about not using pesticides for reasons beyond just health. And so I do think that all of those safety tests, the mandatory testing, is the biggest differentiator between legal and illegal weed, as you say, Pete.
By the way, I like to say, I've used pesticides. I'm not perfect, but I always like to say to these people that are not worried about pesticides, I want to tell them to go take a swim in the Gulf of Mexico, which has the entire Mississippi of worth of runoff in it, and you can find starfish with eyes. Okay, I just made that all up, but I think it's funny. All right, so the big question, the real big question to me, is simple economics here. I have read over and over that in states like California and Oregon, where there's huge markets, there's too much supply and not enough demand because of the law that you're only allowed to sell the weed you grow to the people in your state. Meaning, if you grow hundreds of millions of pounds, whatever the measurement is, in California, but there's not enough of a market, not enough Californians buying it, then okay, you can sell it to the rest of the country and you don't have to worry about it. And that would go the same for cotton and apples and blueberries and any other market. There's nothing else like this, is my understanding. If I grow blueberries in New York, I can sell them to anybody who wants. So this is my big question. You guys answer this question, I think, pretty well. If the entire country were to make it legal, then we wouldn't have that issue that so many states are dealing with of an oversupply. First of all, did I articulate that right? Is that accurately framed? And second of all, what's the deal here, Dan?
Yeah, so you're a free market economist, and I love that about you, Pete. This is great.
Easy. You're gonna damage my Marxist bona fides.
Yeah, that's right. The free market Marxists were for it. So you're exactly right. I would say the free trade agreement that is really important to the world is the U.S. Constitution that says states can't block trade, and that's been great. So it's true. All you had to, if you made cannabis kale, you don't need a bunch of regulations. You don't need a bunch of federal taxes. You just say hands off cannabis. States will deal with it, and that imposes a kind of a free trade across cannabis. Where any place it's legal in the U.S., great. What Robin and I agree on as well is it's really hard to know where it's going to be grown. Will it be indoor cannabis grown in Washington state where they have hydropower and electricity is cheap? Not California, where electricity is higher than anywhere except Hawaii. So for indoor cannabis, which is the high potency, high quality, as it's now measured by price, maybe it won't be California at all. What about labor costs? Labor is really, one of the reasons cannabis is expensive is there's a lot of labor built into the growing and trimming, and labor's not cheap in California. Gee, maybe it'll be Idaho. But labor's a lot cheaper in Idaho. Maybe it'll be Mississippi where labor's even cheaper. So we don't really know where cannabis will really be grown once you make it legal. That's something that there's real money if you can figure that out first.
What does the Canadian market tell us?
They aren't nearly as liberalized as it was federally legal, but lots of restrictions still. So we don't quite yet know.
And it's different in different provinces. So in some provinces in Canada, you have total state control over it, where the state is essentially producing the cannabis. And in other places, it looks more like California. But it's important also that Canada, the market, the entire country is about the size of the California market.
That's true for almost every product.
Right. Yeah. We hear so much about California, and we should. And I think the point you mentioned about labor and resources is such an important point, especially when it comes to California. And I'm guessing you're talking about water more than anything else.
Well, no, not really, because yield is so high in value per acre. You can grow all the cannabis you want with almost, proportionally speaking, about as much water as, watermelons might use. This is not almonds. This isn't alfalfa.
Right.
It's whether it's indoor or outdoor, you're talking about a few thousand acres total. So it's labor, but it's not the other resources. It's not land, and maybe it's not sunshine. If indoor takes over, where's electricity cheap?
Right. So we're really talking about electricity for lighting and fans, and I don't know what else, but I would imagine.
And then labor, and so you want quality labor, and of course we all know. Robin might tell you that Utah is going to be the future of cannabis, but we'll let him say it.
Well, I remember I went out to Colorado in 2011, 12, and I got a tour of a legal indoor grow, and we went on the roof, and it was covered in solar panels, and that was enough electricity for that grow. Why is that not the case in sunshine states? What are we missing about solar powered energy, which is a lot cheaper and, hopefully more efficient soon with batteries, versus all the traditional, more expensive sources of energy? Can't you just cover your indoor grow with solar panels, gentlemen?
I've never heard that that's enough electricity.
Okay.
And of course, the battery issue, we all know. We're all waiting for batteries. Somebody told me the other day, you just use the battery in your car to run your refrigerator. So that is, maybe we'll get batteries to power our house with our Tesla. We'll see.
Yeah, well, that would be another book.
That's great.
Yeah. For sure. All right. So who wants to tell me a little bit about Sabrina's story, which I think is a fascinating chapter in your new book, Can Legal Weed Win?
Yeah. So it's a cool story because back when I was in college, I used to subscribe to the NORML, National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I used to get these, kind of activist emails about how the movement to legalize weed. And they always came from Sabrina at NORML. About 15 years later, by chance came in contact with her again, discovered that she'd left NORML, she'd been in the weed industry and had gone through a lot of interesting challenges and processes in California, in Berkeley, where she'd kind of seen it all. She was involved in the effort to pass Prop 64, which is the ballot question that legalized in California in 2016. That was implemented in 2018. And so the interesting thing about her story is here's just like this pure-hearted activist who had every good intention to make this work, to make legal weed work, legal weed win. And she discovered, the hard way, the political process and how difficult it was to craft a law that was workable. And once you get all these special interest groups, and so she told me all these interesting stories about the political process and the back and forth and getting all these things in from the unions and from law enforcement. And once you integrate all these interest groups' needs into a law, you end up with this big unwieldy thing that may or may not be workable. The state was then charged with writing regulations to follow all these things that have been passed by the ballot question. And then she was forced to contend with the system that she'd helped set up, and kind of was really honest in a really touching way for me about the good things and also the mistakes that were made along the way and what she learned from it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story and important, and illustrates, I think, so much of what you're trying to say here. Dan, let me just ask you, though. Go ahead.
I enjoyed two things about Sabrina. One, that she existed. I assumed she was like Alexa. I said, Robin, come on. There's the Sabrina of your dream.
Normal, right?
This isn't a real person. Know. I don't know what fantasies you were living with when you were 23 years old, but Sabrina's just,
A guy, yeah, Sabrina's just a guy named William in his basement. But no, she's a real person. You have a picture of her in the book.
Yeah, so there you go. But secondly, the transition of Sabrina thinking, oh, the solution to all problems is to have more government regulation. So free market for cannabis meant having the government involved at every step. She now has evolved to being, free market Pete. And that's it's a transition that who would have guessed?
He's so hurtful, Robin. He's attacking me at my core. So you understand the economics, as you mentioned, so many other of these products, Dan. In terms of the future of regulation, we see a lot of regulation, obviously, on other things like tobacco and alcohol and other things that are considered certainly unhealthy to consume. Basically, things with sugar now, you're even starting to see people wanting more labels, much less regulation on. Where are we at right now with the current legal weed paradigm in terms of regulation and the effect it has on price? You hear this from pretty much every grower or store owner, the complaints about all these things that they have to do just moment to moment, frankly, much less day to day. Where are we now, and where do you guys see that going? Will that become more streamlined and easier? Has it in any markets in any states?
I think it will. It has and it will. And partly it's people looking over their shoulder at places that have been a little less onerous. Every one of these regulations are great. Aren't they wonderful? They all have a good purpose. So we want equity. Well, that means we have to inspect who's getting a license and making sure they're the right people. We all want smaller companies. So we're going to have a set of regulations related to how big the company can be. We all want environmental stuff. We don't want pesticides. All of these things are great. None of them are free. And then they all take bureaucracy. So, which means it takes you a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years to get your license, because they're going to, it's like going to the proctologist once a week. Ask somebody in the business. This is a really onerous set of regulations. And part of it for people that used to be illegal, it's the stuff. What do you mean I have to pay taxes? What do you mean I have to fill out an environmental form for the county? Well, every business has to do that.
Right.
The almond grower has to do that. I do think we're moving away from it, gradually streamlining as we learn. And we won't get away from it altogether, of course.
One of the onerous issues for me trying to buy weed at every, it's like when it first became legal, it still is the case. When I walk into those stores, I just get like a child in a toy, like me at Toys R Us when I was little. I can't believe there's so many annoying things that you have to do. And the most annoying thing was you always had to have cash. Like, who carries cash anymore? Has that changed?
Nope.
No, I mean, many stores have ATM machines in there, or some of them will have like ATM.
I don't even know my PIN anymore. My wife just gives me money every week.
Yeah, cash is almost gone, except in the weed world.
Yeah,
true.
So as we look ahead to the future, and you guys also write a lot about the lobbyists. It's so interesting to see former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, the Democrat from South Dakota, and former Speaker of the House John Boehner. Worse so for Boehner because he was such a hypocrite when he was in Congress against legalizing weed, and now he's making millions himself off it. But he's a piece of shit in my mind. Sorry, guys. What he did in so many different ways was so terrible for this country. Specifically on immigration, I digress. Where do you see this headed right now? And by the end, at the end of the book, it's a really great section called the 5 pipe dreams that you debunk. You're going to have to read it to buy it and read it to see what they are. But as we wrap up our conversation, I want to hear from both of you where you think it's going to go, and even if you want to give your take on your opinion where you'd like it to go. You first, Robin.
Sure. Well, first off, I'd say federal legalization is coming. We don't know when, but it's coming. We talk in the book, we talk about what the weed market's going to look like in 2050, and we just start with the assumption that federal legalization has happened. And not many people think it's going to take 30 years, or maybe it'll probably be in the next 10 years. The big open question, and I think the most important question for people trying to understand this industry and predict its future, is what form federal legalization will take. Will they just deschedule it, meaning take weed off the list of illegal narcotics and just let the states go on for a while doing what they're doing now, legalizing piecemeal, or will the federal government take a more aggressive approach and impose a lot of regulations, taxes, licensing, things like that, the way they do with alcohol? We're not experts in the political process, and so we don't make specific predictions about what form it's going to take. But in the book, we do try to say, here's what would happen if they do that. And when you look at the effective tax rates in a lot of the states, for example, where you have 30, 40, 50% taxes, in addition to all these regulatory costs, and you imagine the federal taxation adding even more to that, it all just results in a shift from legal to illegal. Or it damages the viability of the legal weed market. So how much of the share of the market, we don't think illegal weed's ever going to go away completely. It's just there will always be ways of cutting corners and selling it more cheaply to the most price sensitive consumers, and that'll be around. But to the share legal weed has and how much they're able to push illegal out will depend a lot on how federal legalization is implemented.
Yeah. Dan, same question for you. Predict the future.
Yeah. So first step I wanted to say, Pete, is thank you very much. You're even in favor of free markets at the border when it comes to immigration. Open markets. And that's what we're talking about with cannabis. So I like to say, let's make cannabis kale. So weed becomes watermelons. The federal government doesn't tax, you don't go to the watermelon store and pay federal taxes. It's treated like any other crop. It's treated like any other retail product. You're right. If Colorado's good at growing watermelons, that's what you buy. Other than the local season, you'll have a little New York season for watermelons. I have a buddy up in Vancouver who was so proud of his handful of strawberries he could get in Vancouver for 2 weeks out of the year. But other than that, they were great, by the way. I don't want to ever say a bad word about Vancouver strawberries. They're great. But the point is, the more we can open the market and have government step back, the more it'll be naturally a legal product. And the sort of things that you started off telling us, that some people just would like to encourage products to be legal. Great. It's very hard to ask people to do that if you tax it and regulate it to death. And that's the challenge. I think we're moving in that direction. I certainly hope that our statement about the feds is don't screw it up. If they just let it go and not screw it up, that's the best we can hope for. And then states will gradually move in that direction. One of the stories we tell in the book is about Oklahoma. So you had Oklahoma saying, we're a dry state. We want to regulate this because it's a bad thing. But once the people of Oklahoma said, let it be free, then what kicked in Oklahoma is, gee, we're business people here. Business wants to be free, fine. So they took off their regulations and went an unregulated route for the most part.
Guys, I really appreciate talking to you. I love the book. I hope people get it. Robin, I really like you. Daniel, is it true? Is it true? I read up on you, and I do feel like you've kind of exposed yourself. Are you in the pocket of big watermelon and kale? Are you a lobbyist? You have brought it up so many times, and I know you've got a history. Who's paying you, sir?
Let me say this. When I was 8 years old, I made a living growing watermelons.
Well, that explains a lot. It explains a lot. That is a fascinating story. I want to hear more about that at some point. Where?
California. I grew up halfway between Berkeley and Davis.
They're hard to grow. I was just looking to maybe plant some, and they sell a freaking at a garden store, a hammock for your watermelon so it doesn't touch the ground. That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
All right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, congratulations on the book and working together. And I really appreciate it. And we'll be following you and on this issue and so many more. And look forward to have you back. Thank you.
See you later.
Thanks so much, Pete. This was fun.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right. There they go. How about it? Robin Goldstein, Daniel Sumner. They were a lot of fun. Wasn't that fun? Get this book. It's really interesting. Can Legal Weed Win? The Blunt Realities of Cannabis Economics. I really enjoyed that. Hopefully you did as well. And, of course, thanks to Dr. Aaron Carroll. Thank you to Pete Coe for the opening and the jingle. As always, John Carroll for the theme song. Patrick Wilson of Audible provides some of those interstitials. I should be giving him shout-outs, those musical transitions into the guests. And John Carroll has provided those as well. Send me your music. Send me your ideas. Send me your guest ideas. Send me your jokes. Send me your business ideas. Whatever you got. This show is crowdsourced. I love you guys. Can't do it without you. Be the change you want to see. And I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.
I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Stand.